In the 6th episode of the new season of Doctor Who, we got a scene where many of the Doctor's past incarnations' face floated around in hologram form as he was trying to prove his identity, or the fact that he wasn't a vicious alien bird trying to kill people, to Rogue. Nothing completely out of the ordinary in the concept itself. We often get scenes where the Doctor's past faces are shown to us on screen for the purposes of some purpose in the narrative, and also to, just let new audiences get used to the idea that he's had previous faces. But this time there was something slightly odd. There was an odd one out in that face. And that odd one out was Richard E. Grant. What was Richard E. Grant doing in that lineup? Well, I have some options. You'll have heard probably banded around the term Shalka Doctor. I will explain that, but that's not the only option. I think there's about 5. Let's talk about them. Hello, welcome to Culture Filter. I am the Fill-In Filter, and we're going to talk about that floating holographic head of Richard E. Grant's head. What was it doing there? What's it about? What's going on? We're going to talk parallel timelines. We're going to talk unknown incarnations of the Doctor. We're going to talk the Great Intelligence. All of that still coming up. But first, let's deal with the fact that Richard E. Grant has played the Doctor before. If you didn't know this already, he has played the Doctor twice. And I don't mean playing the same Doctor twice. He has played a different incarnation of the Doctor twice. So let's start with the first time he did. 1999, Comic Relief. For those that don't know what Comic Relief is, it's a charity telethon thing based around comedy here in the UK. And I think they have it in other countries. I think there's an American version now. But it's a charity telethon, happens every year. There's lots of comedy skits that air on BBC over that night, and it's a whole thing where they raise money. But in 1999, they did a 4-part Doctor Who comedy spoof thing written by Stephen Moffat. It's the first time Stephen Moffat wrote Doctor Who for television. And it was called Curse of Fatal Death. Or The Curse of the Fatal Death? No, The Curse of Fate. I always get this wrong. It's one of the two. I think I got called up on it last time by Deborah. Sorry, Deborah, if you're watching. And I got it wrong again. Sorry. Curse of Fatal Death. I'm going without any thers in it. Curse of Fatal Death. I think that's right. Anyway, comedy skit. 4 parts of I think they were 5 or 10 minutes each part. And they were split up throughout the night. And the primary Doctor in this was played by Rowan Atkinson, aka Mr. Bean, aka Blackadder. You know the guy. But for the 4th part, the 3rd part ended with him dying and starting to regenerate. And he regenerates into Richard E. Grant. So in this version of the Doctor Who universe, Richard E. Grant is the 10th Doctor. And he's described as a handsome but cocky version of the Doctor. He's very arrogant and swans around. But he doesn't last very long because he very quickly, within a few minutes, gets killed again and regenerates into Jim Broadbent. Then the Jim Broadbent version dies and regenerates into Hugh Grant. Then the Hugh Grant version dies and regenerates into Joanna Lumley. So it's very funny. If you can I think it's available online somewhere on YouTube. Go find it and check it out. It's very funny. But it's not, an established part of the actual show canon. It's a comedy skit, but very good. And I've actually got a very old video on my channel about how it predicted a lot of the stuff in it. Stephen Moffat ended up using in some way in his actual era of the show. So I guess the first option is that it's the Curse of the Fatal Death Doctor, which has to be in some weird parallel universe where the comedy is heightened and all these things happened. So maybe the floating heads are showing us an alternate universe of some kind, and the Doctor just doesn't notice. Or, he's preoccupied. He's seen the back of their heads. Maybe he doesn't notice that that's one he shouldn't recognise. That's option number 1. Option 2. The Scream of the Shalka Doctor. This is the one that if you've been paying attention on Twitter, you'll have seen most people talk about. Scream of the Shalka was a 2003 webcast by the BBC website, the BBC cult website as it was then. At the time, they didn't think Doctor Who was coming back. They were an official BBC platform, and they thought, well, without Doctor Who coming back officially, we have a lot of Doctor Who content. We've got a dedicated Doctor Who page. We've been experimenting with some webcasts with original stories featuring past Doctors. Let's have the official Ninth Doctor be a webcast series. And they launched it with Scream of the Shalka. Unfortunately, as soon as they launched, then another part of the BBC announced they were bringing back Doctor Who properly to television, and the official Ninth Doctor, which they had introduced, got shunted into a non-canon capacity. In this version, which was an animated version, Richard E. Grant voiced the character of the, at the time, considered Ninth Doctor. And he played a much more darker, moody, brooding, almost kind of like grumpy Doctor. He was very Edwardian in his nature, very much kind of harking back to Hartnell in a way, but a slightly younger version, I guess. And in this story, he travelled with an android version of the Master, and picked up a new companion in that adventure called Alison, who worked as a barmaid in a pub in London, and got wrapped up in this adventure. Now, his backstory then later on got released as a little short piece of, I suppose, short story, bit of information on the BBC website, and the backstory was that he had settled down on Gallifrey and retired and fallen in love with the President's daughter, the Lord President of the Time Lord's daughter. But an alien race had come along, attacked, and destroyed the Time Lords. The Doctor teamed up with the Master to defeat them, but in the process of that, the Master's body got destroyed, which is why he's in an android body by the time of Scream of the Shalka. Now, interesting, going back to the President's daughter thing, the 12th Doctor in a story did mention something about there was a rumour that he had run away with the President's daughter or something along those lines. But he made out in that story that it had been greatly exaggerated. That was probably a reference to this little bit of backstory that existed around this Doctor. This Doctor was referenced in the 8th Doctor novels, in fact, as well, because there is one story, I think it's called, The Tomorrow Windows, where the 8th Doctor sees various possible 9th incarnations for himself, and the descriptions match some incarnations we might know of. For instance, we see the description of Rowan Atkinson, but we also hear a description which fits the Shalka Doctor as well. The Time Lords also aren't completely gone. They've been kind of wiped out, but they've also kind of just retreated into the Matrix and are sending the Doctor and Android Master on missions from there. So this Doctor could also be an alternate universe Doctor somehow popping up there, or maybe they'll recontextualize the Shalka Doctor stuff so that maybe it's not he wasn't the 9th Doctor after all. Maybe he was a Doctor that fits in somewhere around where the Fugitive Doctor fits in. Maybe the one after the Fugitive Doctor, or the one before the Fugitive Doctor. Something along those lines of where she fits in, or maybe it's even a pre-Hartnell Doctor, and they might recontextualize it that way. The third option for what this face might mean is that it could be something to do with the Great Intelligence, because of course Richard E. Grant has also played the embodiment of the Great Intelligence in some episodes of Matt Smith's era, particularly the Time of the Doctor, where he went into the Doctor's time stream, and Clara had to follow him in and save the Doctor in all of the times where the Great Intelligence had appeared within his time stream. But what if he had left a slight little shard of himself within there? Maybe Clara hadn't got every little last bit, saved every little last bit of the Doctor, and he'd somehow wormed his way in and somehow became an incarnation of the Doctor, squeezing in between the gaps of existing incarnations. You know, there are so many ways that could work, but that is another possibility. Maybe this is something to do with the Great Intelligence, because as I said, Richard E. Grant has played that role in the show as well. The next idea I have for how this could work is that I want to put forward that maybe it's just an inaccurate record. You know, fake news, a rumour that spreads and becomes accepted fact, the Mandela effect perhaps. maybe somewhere along the lines, we don't know where this information about where all these faces has come. Rogue has done some kind of scan of his DNA, but he's presumably then consulted some kind of database of some kind and the faces have appeared. So maybe, and the fact that it's a database is probably true rather than it just extracting all the faces from the DNA somehow, because all the Timeless Children ones aren't there. We only get like the main doctors we see, and added Ruth and War Doctor as well. So, you know, it's probably a database it's consulting, and databases can get things wrong. Maybe somebody just assumed that this was the Doctor at some point, that this face was one of the faces the Doctor had. It got put on a database somewhere, spread around, and then eventually, millennia later, somebody somewhere that has this database, and it is just deemed as fact when actually it isn't. Could just be completely fake news. And the final option is that it is neither the Shalka Doctor or the Curse of the Fatal Death Doctor, but it is still the Doctor. A face the Doctor has had that we don't know about yet, and we know nothing about. Just because it has the face of a Doctor that we know from another universe doesn't necessarily mean that it is that Doctor. We've had two incarnations of the Doctor that look like David Tennant. They are different incarnations. We've had two incarnations that look like Tom Baker. They are both different incarnations. And that could be happening here as well. Could just be completely coincidence that another version that we haven't yet found out much about or anything about looks like Richard E. Grant. Where that Doctor fits in, who knows? Maybe it's between 2 and 3, maybe it's pre-Hartnell, maybe it's somehow looking at the next incarnation. All possibilities, I think, are still on the table here. But that's just what I think are the 5 possibilities of how Richard E. Grant's face is in that lineup. Let me know if you've got any more, let me know what you think of these theories, and I'll be back for more Doctor Who videos soon. In the meantime, why not check out my other theory video about is the Doctor's granddaughter Susan returning? Check that out by clicking on the screen now.